Well, welcome to the Sales Scholars, where we talk to academic experts about anything and everything sales related. Well, in this episode, we're talking to Dr. Adam Pratt, who is the Executive Director of the Shea Sales Center and a Professor of Sales at Ohio University. Adam has served in faculty roles at a number of universities, including the University of Alabama, Clemson University, and Kent State University. He's also presented at Harvard and Columbia, among others, to discuss his research and cutting-edge techniques and approaches to sales management. In this episode, we're talking about the fundamentals of selling and how organizations can communicate better across multi-generation lines. Hey, today we're excited to welcome to the Sales Scholars podcast, Dr. Adam Pratt out of Ohio University. So, hey, Adam, it's great to have you join us today, man.
Thank you so much for hosting this and making this happen. It's an honor to be a part of the show today.
Oh no, I appreciate it. I appreciated our initial talk before we got here because I know you're doing some really cool things relative to research and certainly in your in the organization there at the institute over at Ohio University. So, one way I always like to start these things is maybe just tell us our listeners a little bit about the work you do at Ohio University and how you got into academia.
Sure, man. I'd love to. So a little bit about my history first is, went to undergraduate, had no idea what I was going to do with my life. Started in a nonprofit business for a few years, decided I needed some more business education, went to Villanova for an MBA, started in market research. And then one day they asked me to make a sales call. There's a long story behind that, but they simply said, hey, look, you like to talk a lot. Candidly, the sales force is out in the field. So will you go on a customer visit? And so for me, as a young 20-something-year-old, it was just a chance to get out of the office for the day. So I jumped at the opportunity. And, on the trip there, I realized I knew nothing about sales, but I knew that people like to talk about themselves much more than they like to hear about me. And I knew the best way to get people talking is to ask questions. So spent some time, asked some questions. The call I was on, the woman was wonderful. She spent a lot of time answering every question I had, even if it was redundant. And then afterwards, she asked me, she said, aren't you going to try to give me the hard sell? And, if I knew, Craig, what the hard sell was at the time, I probably would have went for it. But I didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah.
And, being quick on my feet, I said, hey, I need to understand your needs to try to give you the best solution. I'm sure it wasn't that eloquent. I'm sure I hacked through something. And I'll never forget, she said, wow, it's so great that, a salesperson really cares about me and my needs. And after that conversation, my life really turned because, I talked to a bunch of sales folks and I came to realize that there's some salespeople that truly care about their customers and can impact their lives. And there's others that don't. They just try to make that hard sale. And so for me, I just decided to dedicate my life to trying to help people and more of kind of a servant sales mentality. And now I am director of the Shea Sales Center. And so, my job is to recruit students, to recruit corporate partners, to position the students to be successful in professional selling, and then to try to get some talent to those corporate partners so they can bring those students in. So, they can show some early success and there's not as much turnover. They tend to stay with the organization longer. So that's what I'm doing. And that's a little bit of my history and what I do in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's funny, as I've talked to a number of sales scholars doing some of these interviews, one of the common things that I've come across is a lot of people were in sales before they got into the academic space. I love your story in particular because it was like this particular sales call and sales experience that you're like, hey, I like this stuff. Yeah. And good grief, I wish more people were naturally wired to say to a customer to say to somebody out of the gate, hey, I want to learn more about your needs.
I just had to get her talking, I didn't know what else to do. So I was like, well, how about, what are you trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, I know. Gosh, when the organization I used to work in, we used to talk about our new salespeople. Mm-hmm. As sometimes they did such a great job with customers early on because they just didn't have enough information to be dangerous.
Yep.
So, they had to ask the questions. So
that's a perfect example. I knew enough about the product, but I didn't know anything about sales. So that's exactly right.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, hey, I know when you and I had talked in advance of our podcast, we were talking a little bit about your research and some of the work that you've done, particularly in and around just sales teams, individual salespeople. And you were super passionate when we were talking about this idea of kind of sales fundamentals,
Yeah.
which in today's world, especially with everything going on with COVID-19, that things have really been upended. But I think the idea of fundamentals always being critical to what's going on in the sales world seems to be relevant. So tell me a little bit about why you think that's so important today.
I think you have to have that foundational knowledge, no matter where you get in your organization, no matter how successful you are, whether it be a senior VP, a CEO, a top sales rep, key account manager. You have to start at the ground floor. And the skills that you learn in the very beginning, you will build on those your entire career in your life. And so for me, the fundamental piece, you have to have that. If you're building a house or a pyramid, you've got to have that strong base to build on, or else the rest of it will come crumbling down. And so for me, learning the good skills on how to research and the things on rapport building and needs discovery, how to create an impactful and short value proposition, they're fundamental pieces that once you learn that, nobody can ever take that away, and you can just get better and better at
Yeah.
it. I would argue in today's world with COVID-19 and what we're seeing, we've got to get even better at that, because I mean, as we communicate over a Zoom call, we're losing some of this social context and some of the things that we would normally have sitting across from one another, the handshake and these different pieces. And if you tell me that there's a hard stop in 30 minutes and you have another call, there's a hard stop. So I've got to be effective with that time. So I think those skills are even more important now than they were previous to this era.
Yeah. When you work with students or even organizations and you talk about the fundamentals,
Mhm.
are there two or three of them that stand out to you as, look, man, as a salesperson, you really have to be able to nail these?
Yeah. So off the top of my head, I think I'd probably go with four.
Okay.
The first one, it's my absolute least favorite. It's the research component. Researching that prospect or that customer prior to that engagement to learn as much as you can about them. I mean, there's so many resources now with LinkedIn and social media that you can research so many people and so many organizations, because with sales calls being abbreviated, the more information I have going in, the better off I am. Like the higher I can start that conversation. Instead of like, tell me about your business, I can say, well, Craig, I spent some time researching you and your organization. I understand that you do this. Let's dive right into this issue or problem. And so I can speed up that conversation. So I think research is incredibly important. I think the next thing is being able to develop that connection. Right? I have to be able to make a connection with you. And that stems from the research. So I guess they kind of go hand in hand. But
Yeah.
being able to build that connection of something we have in common, or some relationship that we have, so we can start to establish trust and credibility more quickly. Third, I would say the needs discovery, the questioning. We mentioned that a little bit. I think being able to, build effective question funnels where we're starting off a little bit broad, but then we're really narrowing in on, okay, what is that exact challenge you have, and what is the implications of that challenge? Because I want to see if I can help you, if I can help solve that problem. I want to bring that to the forefront of attention and say, okay, this is important. So when you talk about, well, let me just think about it, or I'll get back to you, understand that the longer we wait, the more money you're losing, the more time you're losing, the more dissatisfaction, customer turn, whatever it is, right? That's the impact of that challenge that I think I can help you with. So needs discovery. And then fourth, I would say the value proposition. Being able to articulate the value that your company or service offers in a short, concise statement that's features, benefits, implications of the information that you share. And a lot of folks had to redefine that moving into this era, because they said, well, if I can't see somebody, or I can't, if my products and services have different meaning now, what do I do? So we got to redefine that value proposition and understand, okay, how can my product or service help you in this new life that we're living?
It's a great list. That value proposition one in particular, I know in conversations I've had with organizations where they have experienced dramatic change, like my salespeople I had all outside salespeople, and obviously they're not. And the value proposition was one of those things that came up often in terms of it's got to be redefined. And at the same time, the sales organizations were running into issues. Obviously their customer base was running into issues with changing the way that their business played out. What have you found anything in particular as people think about value proposition that you're like, hey, here's a really good way to think about it in terms of developing one that can have some good clarity?
So I think the traditional one is feature benefits, right?
Yeah.
We talk about that quite a bit. I really reinforce that, and I say anytime, because a lot of people traditionally, sales folks, give facts, right? And they'll give facts, or they'll give kind of the answers to the frequently asked questions. And I'm like, that's great, but you got to say what it means. Uh, an example for listeners today is, people talk about Ohio University, and they say, well, we were founded in 1804. And my response to that is, so what? Like, what does that mean? I mean, that's wonderful. We're the oldest, one of the oldest universities in the country. So what? With that comes heritage, tradition, quality, decades, generations of experience, and a massive alumni base. I say, if you give the fact, tie it to the benefit and why it matters. I think the other thing is, you talk about the idea of, I talk a lot about outcome process selling as well. So for value propositions, features, benefits, but also if there's a problem or a challenge that you're having, we've identified, and I think I can help solve that problem or challenge, right? There's an outcome that we can achieve that would be beneficial to your organization. I'm going to map out what the process looks like. If we partner together, what process or steps are we going to go through in order to achieve that outcome, that cost savings, that reduction in customer turnover, whatever it might be. So I do feature benefits in Sales 101, and then Sales 102, I'll do outcome process selling and say, here's the outcome you're trying to achieve, and here's how my organization can get you to that outcome.
Gotcha. I could see how that conversation adds would add a lot of value.
Yeah, especially for the more seasoned folks, right? For the folks who are a little bit, if you're dealing with somebody in procurement, they have a lot of experience, really walking them through that and painting that picture. I think that's a different perspective they haven't seen from a lot of sales folks that they value.
Yeah. I wish some of my in my former life and my career, when I had salespeople calling on me, trying to sell me stuff, I wish they would have done that.
Yeah.
I mean, our organization, we worked with suppliers pretty consistently. Like once we were buying from them, we bought from them for extended periods of time. And the amount of times when people would just try to sell you the next thing,
Yep.
versus, hey, I have this problem, and then laying out a process was, it would drive you crazy sometimes. It was easy as a buyer when somebody was trying to sell the next thing to say no.
Yeah. Yep.
No thanks, don't need it.
Yep. But when I can identify an outcome that you want, it's harder to say no to that, because then, boy, I thought we talked about this and you said this would benefit. Help me understand why you don't want to move forward.
Sure.
Yeah.
It makes for a much more collaborative conversation.
Yep.
And feels like when you get there, then the experience is much better. So, hey, I'm curious on any of the either research that you've been doing lately, or any of the things you've been digging into. Any hot topics that you feel like are good sales conversations for our audience today?
Oh, sure. There's a lot of different things happening out there. I'm associate editor of the Journal of Personal Selling, Sales Management, so I'm seeing a lot of the different articles come in. There's some really, really great research. I challenge all the listeners, if you haven't spent some time taking a look at some of the academic research, do that. Reach out to the professors that wrote that and ask them about, hey, what does some of this stuff mean? Because there's some really good research. For me personally, I think the areas that I've spent a lot of time in recently, looking at, again, some of the fundamentals. Time management is an area that I spend a great deal of time in. I do a lot in generations, looking at generational shifts and how it's impacting organizations, on a national level as well as a global level. And then some of the traditional stuff. I also spend a lot of time in team selling, like looking at how teams function with one another and how they collaborate. And especially now in this virtual world, we're looking at virtual team selling, where I've got 4 or 5 different people on my team, a cross-functional team even, a salesperson, a service person, maybe an engineer, maybe a finance guru, and all of us have to work together in order to execute on this complex sale. So doing some research in that space as well.
Okay. The time management one I know is a hot topic. I mean, especially nowadays with technology and how that was, supposedly going to help. Maybe sometimes it does, maybe sometimes it doesn't. What have you found in your research on how technology can kind of help address maybe some of the pressures that people experience from time management standpoint?
Well, Craig, you're spot on, right? Years ago, a decade or so ago, with all the technology started coming out, the CRM and the SFA, Salesforce automation, those terms were used interchangeably, and people started talking about, efficiency and effectiveness. It was going to make us more efficient, and it was going to make us more effective. And I think that dream really wasn't achieved, as you alluded to, because all of a sudden now there's more technology, which gives us more capability of doing more reporting, more data coming in, and to some extent, a paralysis by analysis. Right? I mean, we have so many emails, we have so many reports, so much of this stuff. It hasn't necessarily made us more efficient by any means. There are definitely tools out there, CRM applications that have made tracking customers, have made our lives a lot better in the sense of, now. So I know somebody might be listening, and be like, "Whoa, it has not made my life easier."
Yeah.
Um, but realistically, the ability to track this customer data, whether it be personal data, past purchase history, things of that nature, it, using that data makes us more effective in the field. Having that data at my fingertips, where I can just click on it and see, this company's been a partner of our sales program for 7 years. Here's who the buying agents have been. Here's who they have hired over the past 7 years. That makes the research component so much easier because I don't need to go dig that information up. It's at my fingertips. So I think some of those tools have made, the salesperson's life a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Definitely one of the challenges, and anytime I do consulting or I work with sales managers, is the reporting tools. Is we have the CRM applications. Some of those have 10, 20, 30 different tabs where you can start filling in information. And the challenge is you start to get a little bit overkill, and you'll start to weight your reps down with all of this report filling out, and their evenings are spent doing 2 hours a night just filling out reports of information which may or may not be used.
Yeah. No, man, that's funny. When you do say tools, depends on who you talk to, and whether or not they hate them, or if used correctly, they like them. I'm curious. Have you come across any like best practices in the space as you have done some research on time management, or whether it be organizational or individual, that people seem to really be doing some of that stuff well?
Sure, absolutely. So if we move away from the technology component a little bit and just get more into general time management, when we look at it, time management in and of itself hasn't really changed over, years and years. There are still certain things that we have to be good at and we have to be effective at. And you can make the argument you got to be even better at it now because there's so much technology and there's so many distractions out there. I mean, when you and I were kids, I'm not sure how old you are, but I'm pretty sure you didn't have Netflix and you didn't have, all of these different things to distract
you. Nope, none of that.
And I'm glad. I'm really glad that I didn't have that because, oh man, I would have been distracted pretty easily. But that makes some of these fundamental things even more important. So, when I talk about this, whether it be with companies or when I talk about students, the first thing I always talk about is the idea of procrastination. And it seems simple and it seems fundamental, but research shows, research I've conducted as well as research by different organizations, that on average people waste about 2 hours a day of their working day procrastinating. In sales, oftentimes it's even more. Now I know people will be like, "No, there's no way I waste 2 hours a day. I'm so busy." I'm like, well, it doesn't happen. Hopefully, it doesn't happen in a 2-hour chunk, but 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. You sit down at your computer instead of starting on your email or your work. You visit a website or ESPN.com or whatever that kind of that safety behavior is for you. And 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. All of a sudden, throughout the day, these things start to stack up. And so, one of the big things is the idea of procrastination. How do we avoid that? And so there's certain skills, and these are tried and true, and we've used them, and some folks have used them successfully for generations. But a lot of younger folks coming into the field, they're not as familiar with some of this stuff. And so, for example, I talk about the idea of you set up your calendar, you set up your schedule, you bracket activities. When you leave your workspace at night, you clean up your workspace and you leave your Post-it note on what needs to be done the next morning. This seems like a pretty simple task, and it is. But when I come down in the morning, if I've got a sticky note that says, "Adam, you have to respond to X, Y, and Z," I'm going to be more likely to dive into that task right away than waste that first 5 or 10 minutes, reading articles on Reddit or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
We talk about that. And we talk about the idea of, one of the challenges is the concentration threshold. Like all of us as individuals, there's certain tasks you just simply don't like to do. The challenge is you can only focus on that task for a certain period of time. And so if you think of it like a bell curve, right? You'll start on that task and then you'll start to ramp up and you'll get to a point where you're becoming incredibly efficient and you've really hit your stride. And then you'll start to taper off and then you really start to phase out. Well, the challenge is if you stay in that task beyond the end of that concentration threshold, then you will become really inefficient and then you'll just start to procrastinate. You'll get up, you'll leave your desk, you'll start walking around the office, you'll go out in the kitchen if you're at home, you'll go to other people's offices, the water cooler chats, and you'll stay there because you don't want to go back to the task. So I tell people, I say, think about the things, maybe it's customer calls, maybe it's upset customer calls, whatever it is. If I look at it from an academic perspective, it's grading. Right? I don't like grading.
I was about to say, if any academic heard it, they kind of moan like, oh yeah, grading.
Yeah, and you think about it. Now, and I teach a couple large sections. I know you guys have large sections as well. 120, 140 students. You start looking at exams and you start looking at maybe 2 to 3 minutes an exam. All of a sudden, you're quickly up to 4 to 6 hours of grading. And I don't do it all myself. Like, I'll be honest, I have some assistance with that. But if you go in with the attitude, I'm going to sit here for 4 hours and grade nonstop, it's never going to happen. And all of a sudden that task will drag out, and you will procrastinate and waste more and more time. Whereas realistically, if I tell myself, okay, Adam, you can efficiently work at this for 1 hour, and then at the end of that hour, you're gonna need a break. You're gonna need to do something else. And so if I set up my calendar around that from 8 to 9 is my grading time, and then at 9, I specifically switch tasks to something else so I can come back to that, there's gonna be less likely that when I go to switch tasks that I all of a sudden procrastinate or start engaging in time wasting behaviors. And so, for younger sales reps, maybe it's cold calling. Cold calling's tough and it can wear you out. And if you say, you know what, I'm going to sit here for 6 hours nonstop and cold call, you might be able to do it 1 or 2 days, but you probably won't make it at that job more than a week because you're going to burn out.
Yeah.
And so
that bell curve that you described is illustrative of that, right? Like up to some point, you probably can be effective with it, but then you get that diminishing effect that, it's likely you could probably connect that quite a bit to that burnout.
Absolutely. Right. It's like anything. You could tie it to exercising. You go out for a run and you're like, okay, a 30-minute run. At 15, 20 minutes, I'm hitting my stride. I'm going. But then by the time at 30, I am just slow and I need to stop this and move on to something else. So, and if I don't, then yeah, absolutely. I'm going to burn out. I'm going to collapse. And then I'm going to say, you know what? I don't want to run anymore because it was too painful. Like I'm not interested in it. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely one of the things. Procrastination, it's simple, it's easy. And we see more of it now than ever, just because there are so many distractions and things that can easily just suck us in. And for sales folks, when you're changing tasks and jobs so much, it's so easy to become distracted and all of a sudden lose that 5, 10, 15 minutes every day.
Yeah. No, that's a good point about the number of distractions today. And actually, when you said that, it reminds me of just the younger population, the students. We get a chance to kind of have a front row seat to look at that generation of people. I'm curious because you had mentioned too, you do some generational researches.
Yeah.
What can you share with companies that can help them understand a little bit more about students entering the workforce?
Sure. So I do a lot of research in this space. Over the past several years, obviously we're transitioning pretty quickly into this next generation, Gen Z. I spent a lot of time looking at millennials because when I started in academia in 2002, up through just the past couple of years, I saw this millennial generation enter college, and then I saw them transition over 15 years and how they really changed and evolved. And as a faculty member, I saw folks around me that refused to change, and they said, no, this is the way that I teach. And I saw other ones who were ahead of the curve and adapted new strategies and new ways to engage their students. And I saw that those that change and evolve were having a great deal more success. And as a young faculty member, I said, okay, what are they doing differently than this individual that's struggling? And that really led me to do some of this research. And over the past 5, 6 years, I've surveyed about 14,000 millennials. I've interviewed and surveyed over 3,000 managers of different millennials to identify problems, challenges, and ways that folks can be more successful in the workplace. There's a lot of different things we could dive into, but I think the biggest one is general communication.
Okay.
Communication, and it makes sense. Right? Communication has changed. The form, the function of it has changed dramatically. The speed of it has picked up. Let's go way back. If we go back to my father, 73 years old, baby boomer generation. On the front side of that, he was raised in a situation where face-to-face interaction was all there was. I mean, there weren't phone calls. Yes, there were phones, but phone calls weren't happening. It was all face-to-face. He has the ability to listen, to focus, to hear things, to really stay focused on an individual much, much longer than I do, because that's all he had. And he worked on a shop floor in a steel mill, so he didn't have the opportunity to go back and ask 20 different questions. Like, he had one chance to listen, understand, and then go do the task.
Yeah.
For me, right, Gen X, I've had distractions, obviously spent time on the phone, not as much cell phone later in my life, but on the phone and, video games and different things. So all of a sudden my attention span's shorter than my father's. So for me, I cannot focus nearly as long as he can. I need to be re-engaged. I need a little bit more stimulation. I need things to happen, or I will zone out much more quickly than my dad will. Let's fast forward. Next generation. We look at a generation raised with cell phones, with internet, in a situation where they've always had access to information and much faster communication. Think of text messaging.
Yeah.
Right? So they're ready. They're ready for speedier communication. They're expecting things to happen at a faster pace. If my dad can focus for, a certain period of time and I can focus for less, this generation's even less. And then I look at my children, Generation Z, which is actually, in college now, entering the workforce. That's what we're seeing next. These folks were raised in a situation where they've had multiple devices going at the same time, picture in picture on a FaceTime call while texting. This is a generation, they send a text message, they hold the phone in their hand, waiting for that response. And if they don't have it within, the number's about 30 seconds, they get frustrated. And so all of a sudden we see, and so I tell organizations, so communication sped up. Now, have we gotten better at it? No, we've gotten worse, right? We've gotten worse at listening because we're always in a state of partial attention and there's distractions. So what we need to do is we need to take advantage of this pulse of communication. It's sped up so we can start to deliver more information. We can deliver it a little bit more quickly, but we got to come back and reinforce it through different mediums. And so I'll tell folks, instead of having that traditional 1 hour staff meeting where we dump everything on everybody at the beginning of the week and say, okay, go do your jobs. We start to carve that up now. Instead of doing that 1 hour staff meeting, let's shorten that up. Let's look at a 30-minute, a 15-minute, but then let's reinforce those messages through email, through hallway conversation, text message, group chats, whatever tools or devices your organization uses, because that's going to be a more effective strategy now than what kind of the environment that you and I were probably raised on.
So I'll leave you with this final question, because one of my favorites I actually like to ask everybody in the academic world right now, because you're working with students all the time.
Yeah.
And you're front row seat with the future sales leaders and sales influencers, in our country and beyond probably. What's your take on them? You optimistic, or how do you feel about the future?
No, I'm hugely optimistic. I see these folks come in. I see a generation coming through, especially one coming from sales program, right? Every school I've been at has had a sales program, or I've started one there. So I have a different perspective. But these folks that are coming through, they're hungry. They're better educated about what sales is, about what it means. They're stepping into the field a decade ahead of where I was when I stepped into the field. They have some of this foundational knowledge. They know what it means to be a hunter, to be a farmer. They know if they're in it to make money. They know if they're in it to service people and really cultivate relationships. Man, I see these folks come into the field and, 2 or 3 years out, they're having wild success, like almost a success you can't even comprehend.
That's great, man. That's great. I know that will encourage some people. So, hey, Adam, I appreciate you joining us on this episode of the Sales Scholars. Great conversation. Love the work you guys are doing. So thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for having me, Craig. It's really enjoyable. I love talking about these things. So, if you need anything else, don't hesitate to reach out.